Hello, welcome back to Bonaventure Time. I hope you're having a happy Sunday. Today I thought I'd just make a video on why is phenomenology a thing? Why is it around? What brought it about? I know I've made quite a few videos by now talking about phenomenology, kind of its methodology and different phenomenologists like Husserl, Stein, Hildebrand. Um, but today I kind of just talk about like why is it a thing? Why was it necessary and why was it necessary? Um, so I thought I'd make a quick video. So really quick, to understand phenomenology and why it's a thing, you have to understand actually some other schools. And I've talked a bit about the Cartesian school and what phenomenology kind of took from that. So I won't focus too much on the Cartesians, but the Cartesians are certainly nice to know. If you want to know more about that, I check out my Introduction to Phenomenology video with Edmund Husserl. But the other two schools that are very important to understand are the empirical school with Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, and then Kantianism. Why are these important? Well, if we think about these different going back and forth, right, we have the rationalists and the Cartesians who say everything's a priori, everything is there's sort of this innate knowledge that we have, right, and this kind of knowledge is undoubtable, right? It's indubitable, it's infallible, right? There's sort of a priori knowledge that we have. The empiricists now attack that and they say, no, there's no such thing as this a priori in sort of infallible, right, innate knowledge that we're given, right? For the empiricists, everything is a posteriori, which means everything's off of empirical evidence. Now, that might sound, maybe a little more reasonable in some sense. But what makes the empiricists radical is they're what we call indirect realists. So they don't even think we perceive reality directly, right? So, say, let's take my glasses, right? I don't perceive this cover. I only perceive if you're Bertrand Russell, sense datum, or if you're David Hume, right? The sensation that it gives to me, that makes an impression that's in my mind, right? The real table, right? And this is an example by Hume, right? If you move away from a table, right, it gets smaller and smaller, but that's just an illusion, because actually what's happening is the real table never shrinks, right? There's an impression in your mind of the real table, of the sensation, and that impression gives you a sort of sense of reality, but it's indirect, right? You're not perceiving the table directly, right? So this is what the empiricists claim, right? And so, right, there's a lot to the mind, right? And reality is in a sense kind of conforming to the mind, right, into these impressions that are made upon it. That's a really quick introduction to empiricism. Now, if we look into the Kantian thought, right, for Kant, he's going to try to make almost like a combination of the Cartesians, the rationalists, and the empiricists, right? And he takes there is an a priori knowledge, right? A priori analytic. He also thinks there's a synthetic. I made a video on that if you want to check that out. And then there's a posteriori, right? He's an empiricist, so he wants to keep this sort of empirical evidence, right? But that doesn't negate an a priori knowledge. And so for Kant, though, right, this knowledge that we have of reality, though, he still incurs a problem similar to the empiricists and the rationalists, right? You're going to see a common problem, and that's everything is reducible to the mind, right? Because Descartes, what he started with is, I think, therefore I am. Everything I know only is, right, in me, in consciousness. Now, I've already said in other videos why that intrigued the phenomenologists, and we'll see that in just a moment again. But everything's reducible to the mind, right? And you see that in the empiricists, right? This sense datum that I'm perceiving makes an impression in my mind. Now we see in Kantianism, right? We'd see a bit of an advancement, but still what's happening is, right, these categories, Kant says, of time and space, right? And reality, right, conforms to the mind. He says that, right? Concepts. Our mind doesn't conform to the concepts, right? There's no discovery, right? What it is this conforming of the object to my mind, right? So now reality is really just this presentation or this figment that is conformed through my mind in these images, right? And so Kant's very famous for saying we only know reality as it appears to us because, right, there's this world of phenomena, the appearing, But then there's this world of noumena, the things in themselves, right? And he thinks it exists, but he doesn't think we have access to it. We only have access to what we call the world of phenomena, the appearing. So Kant could rightly be called, what in our school would be called, the phenomenalists, not phenomenologists, phenomenalists, where everything's just disappearing and we have no access to this world of noumena. All right, and so everything's just reducible to the mind, and this is the common problem, right, in all these three schools, is reality becomes just this really something that we're either closed off to, or it's only something in my mind, right, to the point where Hume would say, I don't even know if the past is actually real because it's not giving at a present sensation to me, right, I only experience things in sensations. Right, so this is the problem that phenomenology is facing, right? You see this from the rationalists to the empiricists to the Kantians, the neo-Kantians. You even get German idealists. That's where you get Hegel and Fichte, right? And so why is phenomenology a thing? Because phenomenology, what it wanted to do was refine essences, refine existence, refine reality, right? And so when Edmund Husserl, the student of Brentano, right, developed phenomenology, he wanted to create a philosophical science, is what he would call it, that discovers, right, that discovers the essences, that's not having essences conform to my mind. Now, if you watch some of my previous videos, you know he's fascinated with the Cartesian consciousness, right, the conscious subject. That's something that will take a priority in phenomenology. And I think that was a good thing, because I think there's a lot we can learn, especially if you look into Edith Stein's work and Dietrich von Hildebrand, right? And even Max Scheler, Adolf Reinach, Hedwig Conrad Martius is a great phenomenologist as well. Right? There's something to be there, but it's not reducible to the mind, because what do we have? We have intentionality in phenomenology. This is the starting point, and I've mentioned this in other videos, right? But what this does, right, when I become consciousness of an object, say like my glasses, is this is not conforming to my mind, but it's a unified process in which I am in a sort of correlation with the object, right? And it's not so much I am bestowing a meaning upon this concept, like Kantianism, but it's more of this I discover, right? The essence discloses itself to me, right? So think about this in the context of empathy, right, with Edith Stein. This is one of my deeper fascinations. I do a lot more work in Edith Stein than Husserl. But think about this in context, right? Now, if I have a disclosure of essence with this object of my glasses, right, I understand certain principles of it, and I have this correlation with it, but it's an object, right? Now, when I have empathy, this empathic act towards another, I discover this immediate, right? And Stein says this, it's an immediate awareness that they are a living subject. I'm experiencing reality, right? And think about that. That's such a dramatic change, right? Because now things aren't just reducible to my mind. There's an access in my consciousness of the subject, but it's being brought out of myself, right? And I think Husserl benefits from this, especially he talks about this in his Cartesian meditations later on. And I think as Husserl, and I've talked about this in other videos, moved to a transcendental phenomenology, I think he kind of lost sight of this intersubjective action and empathy, and he didn't stress that as much as a realist like Stein or Hildebrand or Scheler. But nonetheless, that act of empathy, right, it's very fascinating, because now I'm aware that I have to act differently around the subject, because they are an experiencing person, right? I've talked about this in other videos. It's receiving their subjectivity, right? And not in the most positive, if you want to bring up Kierkegaard, in the most positive Kierkegaardian sense. That's what phenomenology is doing. It's trying to find reality outside of my mind, right? Now, it finds it in a subjective experience, and there could be that critique, well, it's only subjective. Yes, but the subjective experience, especially if you move into the realm of intersubjective acts, right? Husserl talks about this, and Stein brilliantly manifests this in the theory of empathy, right? Then you come to enter into their, right, if we're taking the theory of empathy, we're coming into their primordial experience. It's non-primordial content, if you're familiar with that language. I've used it in other videos, right? It's non-primordial content for me, but I'm actually entering into their experience. Empathy is the way that we come to experience other people's experiencing of reality, right? It's a way for the subject to be drawn outside of himself, in a conscious experience, right? Because I come to be conscious of the other's consciousness, right? I come to have access to the other's consciousness. I come to experience reality as they experience reality, right? And that draws the subject outside of himself. And you see some things familiar with Wojtyła and Love and Responsibility, right? And the I-thou relationship, right? It's moving past this egocentric view that I think, honestly, Husserl kind of leaves himself stuck in if you move towards transcendental phenomenology. And moving towards the thou subject, experiencing the world as they experiencing love and being aware of love as they experience and feel love, being aware of their needs, a tenderness, as Wojtyła would call it. And so that's why phenomenology is kind of a thing. I know it kind of went into a Stein and Wojtyła kind of run, but that's why phenomenology is a thing. It wants to create a unified process in which it rediscovers reality, but it rediscovers reality in a way that I am in correlation with reality, where I am not just a subject among objects, but I'm a subject experiencing the world in correlation with objects in reality, right? And I have a sort of participation in reality, right? Where reality is not overlooked, but reality is in relation with me, and thereby I find my own subjectivity, right? And I come to see this sort of aspect of gift. And so that's why phenomenology is the thing. It wants to solve the problems of the Cartesians. It wants to solve the problems of Kantianism. It wants to solve the problem of the empiricists. And really posit a reality that's outside of my mind, and yet still posit a reality that is in correlation with me. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope it kind of explains why phenomenology is the thing, why it was brought up. And I hope you guys take an interest in phenomenology. I think it's a worthy movement to study. I certainly would recommend. There's a couple books that I'd recommend. I'd recommend Husserl's Ideas, which I do not have on me at the moment. But Hedvig Conrad Martius, this is a response to Edmund Husserl's Transcendental Phenomenology. She's a wonderful phenomenologist. Of course, I always recommend her. Edith Stein. This is a great dialogue between Thomas Aquinas and Edmund Husserl. And then, of course, this is one of the greatest works in phenomenology. Dietrich von Hildebrand, What is Philosophy? Anything by Hildebrand I'd recommend. But those are really going to get you into what phenomenology is studying from an epistemological standpoint, especially from Martius and Hildebrand, and then Husserl. His ideas and his logical investigations are going to get you more the sort of noematic structure is what he calls it. So the conscious subject, the thinking subject, right? And the perceived object as such in the consciousness correlation. And then Stein's Empathy. I highly recommend. Stein's Empathy, I think, is a massive work in phenomenology. Husserl himself praised it and would utilize it in a lot of his later works. So I highly recommend that. I think it's a great introduction into phenomenology and its benefits. I think phenomenology benefited far more when Edith Stein came on the scene and introduced empathy. So I hope that helps. I hope that helps pique an interest in phenomenology and kind of helps you understand why is it a thing and why it came about. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. God bless.